video here on how to do a throttle body sync as well as delete the wax idle unit while I have the bike torn apart right now. I just did the TB sync to try and fix this idle issue that I've been having. Figured I may as well just delete the wax unit while I'm in there as well. So real quick, the wax unit's right there. Basically, to delete this, there's a nut that goes on the top of that threaded portion right there. Just take that nut off, and basically the wax unit will still do its thing, but it's not going to be connected to the throttle bodies anymore by taking that nut off. So when you start the bike, it might idle a little low. What I think I'll end up doing is just cranking it manually using the second idle adjuster to mimic exactly what the wax unit would do, and then after I see the temps go up a little bit, then I'll just drop it back down. Basically this way, if you're having idle issues, sometimes the wax unit can get stuck, needs to get rebuilt, so it'll idle real high on startup, but the wax never melts or anything like that, so you never get it to drop down. This was one of the things that people said might cause idle fluctuations too, so I figured I may as well do it while I'm in here. When you want to do this is after the bike is completely warmed up, get it to operating temp 190, 200, set your primary idle adjuster, the air fuel down here, set that to 1400 or whatever you run your stock idle at, and then you'll pretty much never have to touch this again. And then once it's set at 14, then you can remove it. You know, you don't want to do it when the bike's cold because then you won't have a good idle set. You can still adjust the air fuel ratio down there, you know, even with that nut off. All that does is gets rid of the wax unit from moving the throttle bodies when it's warming up. So this is the Motion Pro sync tool that you can get online. It comes with these hoses. The 4 up here, it's basically one long piece of hose and you just cut it into 4 equal sections. Comes with this 5-way fitting right there, and the only thing you need is an extra piece of hose, which is here, and then a plug for the other end of the 5-way. Just follow the instructions on this Motion Pro tool. It's super easy to set up. You hook up the hoses, you make sure those adjusters are all the way counterclockwise, I believe. There's some restrictors that go in the bottom of these hoses that you push in with that 5-way splitter. That's all you got to do to set this up. If you're a part of the F4i Stunt Riders Facebook page, Paul Mart does a great video on how to actually sync the throttle bodies. Do exactly what he says. What I want to cover is, you know, how do you set this all up? Because to calibrate the tool, you know, you have your vacuum hoses right here that go onto the air box that are usually plugged there. But what I did was I just put a flathead screw in each one of them and then zip tied it to the frame, just because I accidentally forgot to put them back onto the air box nipples back there. That way they're all permanently plugged and you can always see them. But essentially, to calibrate the tool, you got to get to where these vacuum hoses go on the motor, which it's kind of hard to see because they're kind of tucked down in there, but it's extremely hard to get your hands in there. So when you're doing this, I basically popped the throttle bodies off, put the vacuum hoses where they needed to be, popped them back on, you know, screwed the clamps shut, calibrated it, popped them back off, removed the hoses, changed their locations to where they need to be for the sync. Like I said, refer to Paul Mart's video. I'll try and throw that in the link. You might have to join the group. This is not exactly a step-by-step. It's more just some helpful hints, because you'd think you could just get to those hoses like this fine, but you can't stuff your hands in there to pull the hoses on and off, especially when the bike's warm. You got to pop the throttle bodies off basically in between each step. Use a pair of like latex gloves because it will get a little warm. Calibrate the tool. You got to pop them off, put the vacuum hoses where they need to go, pop the throttle bodies back on, tighten them up, do the calibration. Got to pop them off again to get the hoses off and replace them to where they need to go for the test. Put the throttle bodies back on, do the test. You got to pop them off again, pull the hoses off, put the vacuum hoses back where they need to be. Then you close the throttle bodies completely, push them down, lock them in, and then you should be back to your original setup. These are the adjusters, these little screws here. You can adjust throttle body number 1. That's kind of the baseline. You calibrate the tool to that, and then you base everything off that. But you have 1 here, 3, 4, and I believe if you go clockwise, it will draw the fluid down in the tool. And then if you go counterclockwise, it will bring it up. You'll see when you play around with it, just do small adjustments and you'll see the fluid change. That's kind of all I want to talk about for the TB sync and the wax unit delete. It's easy in his video because he's got the motor out of the frame and everything, so it's easy to hook up, but you can't get your hands up under here easily to pull those vac lines. So you got to pop these off, put the lines on, put them back on, do the calibration, pop them off, put the lines on where they need to go for the test, pop the throttle bodies back on, do the test, pop them off, pull them, place the hoses where they need to go. Then you're all synced up. That's my piece of advice there, and if you have questions on it, go ahead and ask. The TB sync is pretty straightforward. Once you get it calibrated, you're just basically using the adjusters on the throttle bodies to make sure that the blue fluid, all 4 are level across the board after it's properly calibrated. So that's how you do a TB sync and a wax idle delete.
Alright, so today I'm going to show you guys how to do a throttle body sync on an F4i. So first off, I'm going to start off with just explaining what you need to do before you do the sync. The next step is going to be how to hook up all the hoses properly, and then how to actually do the sync. So first thing, a sync is not a magic solution to your problems. If your bike runs like shit, it's going to run like shit after you sync it too. So make sure, change your spark plugs, change your oil, check your clean air mod, top off your radiator, just make sure you've got your basic tune-up completed first. Next part is to check all your vacuum hoses, because these are pretty important to the sync and to your bike running correctly. So your first one is this one down here that connects to the bottom of the head, and you'll want to just plug that off. It usually goes to the air box, but you can just plug it with a screw or a bolt. Same thing on this one down here, and these are actually your number 1 and your number 4 that you'll use to do the sync. Plug that one here. Next, what you want to check is this 3-way splitter. So this 3-way connects to the bottom of the fuel pressure regulator, and that 3-way splitter, those two hoses should go to first the number 2 throttle body on the outside prong, and then the number 3 throttle body again on the outside prong. So right here you can see both of them. Once you have that, just check the hoses aren't rotted, dry rotted, whatever, have holes in them. If they are, just replace them. They're cheap. You can get them at any auto store. Next is this 5-way splitter right here. This one actually goes to your map sensor. So you're going to have one line going to the map sensor to the 5-way splitter, and that's going to connect one to the number 1 throttle body, one to the number 2 throttle body on the inside. Remember how I said there's the outside and there's the inside, so the 5-way splitter goes to the inside. It's going to go to the inside of the number 3 throttle body, and then to the number 4. So again, just check all those connections and make sure those are good. Once those are good, what you're going to want to do is turn on your bike, let it warm up. When you first turn it on, it should idle a little bit higher, probably around like 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. As the bike warms up and as coolant is flowing through what's called the fast wax idle unit, the wax inside the unit's going to melt, and then that's going to lower your idle down. Once your bike is warmed up, get it up to like 190, 200, whatever kind of operating temp you run. The next step is going to be to shut the bike off and to calibrate the Motion Pro Sync tool. So the way that you're going to do that is you're going to take these 4 hoses, individual hoses, and you're going to route them to this 5-way splitter that's provided by Motion Pro. So those 4 hoses are all connecting right here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It doesn't matter where you put them, you can put them in any order you want. Then you'll want to plug that cap, just plug that end of the splitter, and then you'll need 1 extra section of hose that is going to go to your number 1 throttle body port. So that is right down here. So there's your number 1. Your fuel pressure regulator is usually somewhere right around here. It's going to be just below that, kind of tucked under, and you'll want to hook that up. So again, your number 1, come in here, go into this splitter, and then these 4 hoses are going to your tool. Once you have that hooked up, you'll turn your bike on. Again, it should be warm, but in case it's not, let it warm up all the way. And what you'll want to do is look at this tool, and what you're going to see is this blue fluid is going to get sucked up into these little tubes. The number 1 might be up here, number 2 might be down here. They're going to be all over the place. So what you're doing is you're calibrating the tool to where it's all level. And in order to do that, it's got these little adjustment screws right here. So just take a little flathead screwdriver and turn them in or turn them out until the blue fluid is all level across the board. Once it's all level, it's steady, your RPM on your bike should be set to about 13 to 1400. I like to set it right around 1400. So I'll set it at 1400 using this lower idle screw adjustment. Your second idle, which is normally here, is going to be backed out all the way. So again, set this one to 1400 and adjust the blue fluid levels until they're all even. We're now ready to actually sync the bike. So what you'll want to do is disconnect the 4 hoses from this 5-way split, from this splitter, and disconnect that entire hose. If you remember, it was hooked up right here. You'll want to disconnect this one, which I've already done, and just attached it here to the side. Next, you'll want to take the 4 hoses and route them to the individual throttle body. So I'll show you where each one goes. The number 1 is going to go down below the number 1 throttle body right here on this port. So that's actually where you had this 5-way splitter line hooked up to a minute ago. So again, the number 1 is going to go to this port down here. Number 4, you're going to take that one and you're going to route it pretty much on the opposite side on the number 4 port. So again, it's below the actual throttle body. It's not on the throttle body. The number 2 and the number 3, you're going to look at your fuel pressure regulator. Follow, it's normally pointed like this. Follow the line that points down to a 3-way splitter. And that 3-way splitter is normally connected at this port and at this port. So that's going to be your number 2 and your number 3 for the sync. You've got your number 1 down here below the throttle body. Your number 2, again, follow your 3-way splitter, the outside connection, that's your number 2 for the sync. Then your number 3 from the splitter is going to be here. And your number 4 again is below the number 4 throttle body. So once you've got that all hooked up, you're ready to sync. These 2 hoses, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to plug them. You just leave them as is. So what you'll do is you'll turn your bike on, let it warm up. If it's cooled down again, let it warm up to operating temperature, whatever you run it at. Set your idle adjustment down here at 1400 RPM. It should already be set, but in case it's changed or whatever, set it at 1400. Then what you're going to see is you're going to see the fluid get sucked into these tubes at different levels. And what you're wanting to do is the number 1 has no adjustment. So you're going to adjust the numbers 2, 3, and 4 throttle body in order to get the fluid level all the same and sync the same. And you'll be able to hear a little bit of a difference in the motor when you've got it synced correctly. Now the way that you adjust it is you use these little screws right here. You can tell the number 1 doesn't have any sort of adjustment because that's your standard that you set to. So you're going to adjust your number 2, your number 3, and your number 4, and you're going to turn them in or out in order to raise or lower the level of fluid in each tube. So as you turn, I can't remember exactly, but I think as you turn this in, the fluid level rises. As you back it out, the fluid level drops. I could be wrong on that. I can't remember exactly, but either way, turn the screw. It's going to adjust here, level them all out. Now, one thing that might happen is as you're adjusting this, your idle might go up or it might go down depending on how these throttle bodies were before. So let's say, for example, you're adjusting the number 3 and the number 4, trying to get this all evened out, and your idle goes up to like 1600 RPM, 1700 RPM. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to turn this down back to 1400 and make whatever adjustments to get this level. So pretty much when you're all done syncing everything, your idle should be set at 1400 and the fluid in the tubes should be pretty flat and pretty even. And you'll hear a difference in the motor if you record before you do it and after you do it. Really far off, you'll hear a difference where the motor actually sounds better. So your idle should be pretty steady at that point. A good way to test it is to turn up your second idle cable, which is usually here. Turn that one up to like 3,000 or 4,000 RPM, whatever you set your stunt idle to. If it's steady, it means you've done a good job syncing it and your bike's running pretty good. If it's not steady at that point, then you need to go back and look at all your hoses, make sure your connections are good. There's a few things that could be wrong. Your fuel pump, your spark plugs, look at your basic tune-up items and make sure that those are all kind of checked off really before you do your sync. So once you're done with that, you'll just unhook up all the hoses, hook these ones back up right here. That 3-way splitter, is going to go right there. Your 2 hoses on the number 1 and the number 4, remember the ones that were plugged, you'll just put those back and then you should have a pretty awesome running bike.
Hottest stash in the carpet. Yeah, we trapping out apartments. I ain't done when you start shit. To be honest, get the flame in my heart, gotta spark it.